Do you support the monarchy in its current form, or would you support abolition?
He won the war but lost the peace.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Politics Relaxed podcast. We're joined with a very special guest. Ruth Cadbury, the Member of Parliament for Brentford and Isleworth, joins us today. So I want to get straight into it. I was watching coverage last night from 2019 general election, and I saw interviews from many voters at the time. And generally there was this kind of thing that everybody voted Labour during the Blair years. Oh, I'd voted Labour for my whole life, people were saying. And then they said they voted Tory. Generally, these were like red wall seats, so the main message from these areas was the working man had been forgotten about. Are the Labour Party still the party of the working class? And do you have a message for those people who voted Tory for the first time?
Oh gosh, that's a lot to pack into a question, and I'm not sure whether I'll do it all justice. I think there are a lot of different reasons why our long-standing Labour vote left us, particularly away from London. But it wasn't just in the northern seats. It wasn't just in the ex-industrial seats. I mean, we've been losing voters since 2010. In and around the southeast, particularly Kent and Essex, and other towns in the southeast of England and central of England, which where we used to have MPs, and we need to win over 150, I think 170 more seats back,
Yeah.
if we're to have a working majority, a Labour majority in Parliament under the current first past the post system. So, and we certainly didn't lose votes in London. And in fact, my majority, I took a seat from the Tories in 2015. It was a seat we lost in 2010. Took it back by a very small margin in 2015, less than 500 votes. And then my majority went up to over 12,000, I think, and held about 10,000 in 2019. So very mixed and different patterns. My take is on why we lost voters. I think both in 2017, 2019 and in the Brexit referendum, that a lot of people in working class areas, a lot of people who are working class voters felt abandoned by politicians. And even in the referendum, I think people were voting against Whitehall and Westminster as much as they were voting against the EU. It was a vote because of feelings, not because of facts. Because I think we're all seeing the consequences now of what Brexit means, and we were being accused of being Ramonas then, and unfortunately, sadly, what we predicted around Brexit has come to pass. So there's this sort of this disjoint with decision making, and there is a reality in Britain about where decisions are made. Local authorities, councils have very little leeway and very little power. A lot of responsibilities, very little power, and very little leeway in what they can spend their money on, and less money. So that filters through to what people feel. I think we know there was a strong dislike of Jeremy Corbyn and what he stood for and how he came across among our traditional British working class voters. He didn't speak for them, and he didn't speak for me either. And I'm not traditionally working class. Yeah, the message for people who voted Tory for the first time in 2019. I mean, if you're a Labour voter, you've always been a Labour voter because you know the Labour Party at its core has your interests at heart. Then look at Keir Starmer, look at what we stand for now. Put Jeremy Corbyn, that was an unfortunate blip. Put him and behind you, and believe that, as I believe, that Keir Starmer is where the mainstream interests of working class people and the interests of Britain now lie.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ruth Cadbury. My name is Rajan Semi. I'd like to firstly thank you very much for your time today.
Nice to meet you, Rajan.
What would you say? Thank you. What would you say is your biggest achievement in office?
Gosh, you mean since I became an MP?
Yes.
I think I feel I've been part of winning quite a number of different points on different issues. I mean, I co-chair the all-party parliamentary group on cycling, or we're now the APPG cycling and walking, so active travel, and I think I've been very much part of raising the profile of cycling and walking in Parliament and nationally, and apparently our presence, our media presence, our social media presence actually has a higher hit rate than the groups you would think have a high hit rate, such as Cycling UK and the Ramblers and Sustrans and so on. So that's quite impressive. I'm quite proud of that, because I have been a co-chair of that APPG ever since I was elected. And that's quite important because it's a cross-party issue. I mean, I can't take credit for Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's enthusiasm for the role of cycling in the transport mix, and certainly with COVID and the emergency funding and regulations, I think are down to him and a couple of his advisors. But getting traction of that across Parliament, I'm proud of. So and because there's opposition to some of that investment and some of those powers, again, from not only from Conservative councils but from Labour councils as well. So this is really a cross-party issue. Speaking up for my area and being the main vocal opponent of runway 3 being built at Heathrow Airport, I guess is another issue. But like most of these things, we never do anything. We're not often doing stuff on our own. We're normally doing it with others.
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's great to hear that in such a time where we have such a divided nation, we can really see you joining a lot of all-party parliamentary groups, and at a time where we really need some consensus in British politics. Speaking of all-party parliamentary groups, a few days ago you attended the launch of the all-party parliamentary group for electoral reform, backed by the organisations Electoral Reform and Make Votes Matter. These groups seek to change the current archaic voting methods. How and when is it likely that we can see changes in these systems? And would you push for electoral change in the next Labour manifesto, and if we see a Labour government?
Electoral reform, I've long held that the first past the post system is a failed system. So I, along with a lot of people in the Labour Party, and again the other political parties apart from the Conservatives, support electoral reform and some form of proportional representation. But I think we should always keep a constituency link, a geographic link as well, with so that all voters have a geographic representative, but that the things are balanced up through some kind of list system. I think there's a fair chance. I think there's a fair chance that if we get into government, if we have a Labour government or a Labour-led government, I think that's the time that it'll come in. There's a lot of local constituency Labour parties that either have policy supporting electoral reform or are going to be debating it in the next few months. So I think there's a good chance it will become Labour Party policy, and that should we be running the country, then I think that's the time to bring it.
I want to go back to the point about red wall voters, and I want to talk about this sense of patriotism, because a leaked internal briefing a few weeks ago, I'm sure you saw it, with Labour using the Union Jack and dressing more smart to try and win back these voters. The strategy's come under fire by some within the Labour Party, such as Clive Lewis, who recalled being told there ain't no black in the Union Jack while serving in the army. Is it as simple as waving a flag and dressing smart to win back these seats? And do Labour grasp the full meaning of the flag, especially to black and minority ethnic community, for which the flag can represent racism and hate?
I think one should. I've always thought, and it's something my father told me, that you should come over as people expect to see you. And if you are working, so this is about dress, and actually I feel a bit informal today. I wish I'd now put a jacket on instead. But it's recess, like half term, so that's my excuse. But I think people, and particularly working class people, but I don't think I don't think there's any difference. But I think that's my sense. My father said, because obviously he wasn't working class, but he worked for a housing association whose tenants were working class in the north of England, and he felt very strongly that you should dress as people see you. If you're a professional, you should dress as a professional. If you're a nurse, you should dress as a nurse. If you're a doctor, you should dress as a doctor, etc., etc. So I think the Union Jack. All the evidence and all the polling shows that that the Union Jack is a symbol, a proud symbol of nationalism, and nationalism in the positive sense. And actually, interestingly, a lot of polling that was done, including by British Futures, which is a social kind of it's a sort of centre-left think tank on attitudes to country and immigration and so on. I think it was their findings, but there's been quite a lot of research among the BAME communities and BAME citizens. And actually, I think one of the places in the UK which had the strongest British affiliation was Harrow, which is there's no white majority population in Harrow, and Harrow is, like Hounslow, very large ethnic minority population. So when we talk about the British flag, the Union Jack, there is a strong cross communities support for pride in the Union Jack. There's a different issue about the English flag, and part of our problem, I think, and part of the problem with politics in Britain is our disjoint between being British and being English. And unfortunately, English nationalism was a major driver for Brexit, from the leaders of Brexit.
Hello everyone, this is Felix from the future. Just a very quick on this interview. It's filmed a few weeks ago, so we hadn't seen the Meghan Markle interview. Like and subscribe, and back on with the video. I just follow up on that because again, a video resurfaced online with Keir Starmer supporting the abolition of the monarchy. Would you support the abolition? Do you support the monarchy in its current form, or would you support abolition?
I don't think there's a case for abolition. I mean, intellectually, I think we've got some issues about the way our constitution is set up. In fact, we don't have a constitution, and we've got some if you study politics and comparative political systems and you study constitutional politics and constitutional law across different countries, our system is very weird. But it certainly works, I think, especially under the current Queen. She is hugely popular. She's almost certainly a huge asset to the economy because, she is revered, not just in Britain, but across the world. And I think that helps to strengthen the sort of rather weird constitutional setup. So I wouldn't be a big fan. I think advocating abolition of the monarchy right now would be wrong. I might have done when I was a student, and my father was a Republican. I mean, I'm a Quaker, and our forebearers were locked up in prison for not doffing their caps at the King. So, my genes are Republican, but politically, I think it's a non-starter.
Thank you. I want to go into talking about the NHS because, according to King's Fund, this decade has been the slowest growth in funding for the NHS, where it's only been 7.2% increase. I want to ask, should Labour win the next general election, do you feel we need to consider giving more funding to the NHS, considering the fact Boris sold us this idea, or the people who voted for Brexit, that a lot of the money we were paying to the EU would actually just go to the NHS instead to help us, yet we're seeing it hasn't actually gone to the NHS and there hasn't been much of an increase. What do you think should happen with that?
Yes, I think we should increase the NHS proportionally as we did when we were in government, and that support hasn't held up since 2010. However, it's not as simple as just giving more money to the NHS under its current makeup. We have there's no point in funding the NHS unless we also address the funding of social care. And in England, we have this disjoint between social care, which is the responsibility of local authorities. But as I said at the beginning of this interview, the local authorities have all these responsibilities without the funding to support it. And so you end up in reality. So you know what often happens is an elderly person who needs care in the home is stuck in hospital because the NHS, it's called cost shunting. The NHS and the social services are trying to both not be liable for that cost, and they're in competition with each other, which doesn't happen in Scotland and Wales. So we need to address that structural disjoint. We also, even more importantly, need to address the health inequalities in the UK. It costs money when people are obese through the need to eat cheap food because they can't afford good food. It costs money to address the mental health issues of children who weren't supported in their early years and their parents weren't supported in their early years. There are so many hidden costs that come out that the NHS has to pay that wouldn't be there had we invested in people and addressing inequalities. I mean, one of the huge costs that's been rising in recent years is tooth extractions for under 10-year-olds. Because their diet is so poor, they don't have access to dentists because they can't afford it, and there aren't free dentists near too often. They've got terrible tooth decay. Oh, and school nurses have been more or less almost abolished. So you've got phenomenal tooth decay in adult teeth, not baby teeth. And children are in hospital, overnight, general anaesthetic, having their teeth removed, and then having to have dentures. It's like, that is just, and that's just 2 or 3 examples. And the NHS has to be responsible for our health, not just our illness.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote an article recently about health inequalities because there were papers, reports on it recently. And I want to carry on with this kind of theme of the NHS, because our public sector workers have been treated horrendously for the last 10 years in a Tory government. For example, an ITV Commission study filled out by nurses revealed over 30% of nurses plan to leave the profession within the next 12 months, and 39% skip meals to feed their family. We see similar findings among doctors and teachers. And doctors have cited COVID-19 burnout and frustrations over pay. And it's the same sort of things with teachers and nurses. This is kind of a worrying trend, especially with the retention. How would Labour propose to increase retention numbers among the public sector? And would you commit to giving these professions at least a 15% pay rise?
Well, I'm not going to commit to a figure because one of the things we have to do as Labour MPs is be quite disciplined. It's up to Keir Starmer and Annalise Dodds to be prepared to put numbers. But it's partly about retention. And certainly the lowest paid, then we need to address the low pay. I mean, I think, to be honest, senior clinicians, doctors, nurses, specialists, they're probably not badly paid. But lower, at the bottom end, the pay is too low. But they've got to do, if you ever do any kind of, organisations can do a lot more than just pay people more if they want to retain them.
Yeah.
Is to value them, to train them. I mean, I know West Middlesex Hospital has a really good wellbeing programme, and they've invested a lot in staff wellbeing, particularly during COVID. Rest places, access to free counselling, support for shopping and things like that. So you've got to look after people. But the other reason people are leaving is, Brexit. I can't remember how many tens of thousands of clinicians, especially nurses, we lost because of Brexit, because they couldn't be guaranteed of status, settled status here, and just the disrespect that people felt after the Brexit vote, even in London. A number of times I heard, I'm not wanted here, I'm going home, or I'm going back to my home country, even though maybe not even, been lived there for many years. And it also meant EU clinically qualified people stopped coming here. So, we started the COVID crisis with short of 70,000 clinicians in the NHS, 40,000 of which 40,000 were nurses. So, it's just yet another practical example of ideology versus common sense that Brexit caused. Not even considering how we would staff our NHS in the long term. And you have to reach a certain salary threshold to be permitted to stay in the UK, and if you don't, and I think it's 30,000 or something, or maybe even less than that. So, and that's a heck of a lot of basic pay, people who are the bread and butter of not just hospitals, but primary care and so on. So, yeah, yeah.
I want to ask about hate crimes and racial injustice in general, because in the year ending March 2020, there were 105,000 hate crimes recorded by the police in England and Wales. In 2012 and 2013, there were only 40,000. Well, 12 months between 2012 and 2013. Obviously, this is a huge increase, and one that is very not very nice to think about. If Labour were to win the next general election, what would you do to combat this, to prevent it from continuing rising?
Oh, wow, that's a massive issue, and it is appalling that the level of the way hate crime has expanded. Now, in terms of numbers of crimes, I think social media is responsible for a large growth in the number of crimes because of social media abuse. A post counts as a hate crime, but that's not to excuse it. All I'm saying, it's just really easy to sit in front of your computer at home and write some ghastly rubbish, some really offensive stuff, and it's the worst kind of bullying, because it's not like playground bullying where there's a chance that you would be disciplined either by your peers or by those in authority, or somebody would see you or whatever. You could be challenged. If you're sitting in your room at your computer, you can say whatever you want, and that's just and that has to be dealt with by the internet providers. And we are a long way behind that nationally and internationally in terms of the social media platforms. Need to really be far better at this. We need to improve laws on online hate crime, and I think there's some legislation coming out. But what's gone along with that rise has also been the rise in violent abuse, violence and abuse as well, physical violence and abuse, and I think there's a growth of intolerance in society. I don't, it's true in the US as well. And at a time when you'd think we'd be getting more mature and as a society and more tolerant, in fact, the opposite is happening. Even in London, where BAME and LGBTQ plus crime is also on the increase, hate crimes on the increase. We need stronger laws. We need better invested police. We need, in terms of all crime, we need to feel confident that the criminals will be caught and punished. We need to, we also need to look at how schools are addressing the issues as part of the curriculum, as well as in terms of their own policies and procedures for dealing with hate crime by students, whether it's in school or outside of school.
Thank you for giving up your time. Just a final question. 100,000 people have died during the COVID pandemic. The NHS and other public services have been ravaged by cuts, as we mentioned before. Over 4.2 million kids are now in poverty in the UK, and yet this government don't feed them. NHS staff haven't had a real term pay rise in over 10 years, and the government have made U-turn after U-turn during the pandemic. Many have suggested Keir Starmer's not being vocal enough. Why are Labour still trailing in the polls? And how do you stop yet another Tory government tearing apart this country?
Okay, well, we're not like to have a different government for a while because Johnson's lot have got a majority of 80 and can sit there until the required next date for a general election, which is 2024. I think, actually, well, it's up to what do you think? If you sit through Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer's got a big speech tomorrow morning, I think 11 o'clock. Tell me what you think, because obviously I'm hugely supportive of Keir Starmer, and I really hope he becomes the next Prime Minister, the next Labour Prime Minister. I think it is. There is some evidence to say that in a crisis, there is a default position that people prefer to just say they support the government because, despite all the evidence showing that until the vaccination programme, this government had failed in all respects it had been a failure of leadership in all respects, U-turns, delays, prevarication and so on. And I think the only reason they've got the vaccination programme more or less right is because finally they've allowed the NHS to actually lead it. And they've allowed the NHS, and the NHS are working with local authorities. And although it is costing a lot of money, it's effective money. And rather than badly funding programs like Test and Trace and PPE, where they wrote checks to their friends for no decent quality outcomes. But anyway, I think there is a default position where people, that nobody outside of government, it's difficult for an opposition to get airtime, and people want to believe the government, and we're not in government. Keir Starmer is not the Prime Minister so he can't say, if I was in government I would do this, but he is criticising very effectively what Johnson is doing, and as I say, I think he's been pretty impressive at Prime Minister's questions, and it's really difficult when if you count how many questions that Keir Starmer asks, does Boris Johnson actually answer? And like a typical playground bully, he turns the question back to attack the questioner, and the speaker does pick him up on that. So if you think about Winston Churchill, he won the war but lost the peace, and I think there's something to be said for the polling isn't likely to improve because we're in this crisis until afterwards, and the postmortems happen, and also we start saying what the recovery should look like and what the recovery will be under Labour, and then I think there's a sense of hope in the same way as there was that sense of a new beginning in 1945 at the end of the war.
Yeah, but the worry is like these red wall voters aren't watching PMQs; they're reading the Sun or the Mail. So like, how do you get your message to them?
Well, even the Sun and the Mail are not exactly big fans of Boris Johnson. I think that the problem is people who don't read any mainstream media.
Yeah.
And this is what I was saying, that we're often dealing with feelings versus facts, and feelings that are where the volume's turned up, linking to non-facts. So in a way, some of the anti-vaxxers have gone. So I think give it time. Give it when people start saying there's got to be an alternative to Boris Johnson, and then they'll pay more attention to Keir Starmer and Labour. But my understanding is like being in a war at the moment. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah. Thank you to
I
Jose.
hope it comes to an end.
Yeah, me too. Thank you to Jose and Rajan for helping me interview, and thank you so much for giving up your time to do this interview, and thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.